let's talk about Fire Island. In the tradition of many a Pride and Prejudice adaptation, I think we should start with a Jane Austen quote.
It's a truth universally acknowledged.
Not that one. This one. Vanity and pride are different things, though the words are often used synonymously. A person may be proud without being vain. Pride relates more to our opinion of ourselves, vanity to what we would have others think of us. While many a high school English essay can tell you that Pride and Prejudice's title is a reference to the primary failings of its characters, there's a little bit more nuance than that when it comes to pride. Because, as that quote tells us, pride and vanity are different things. And, as Darcy will tell us a little bit later in the novel, while vanity is always a weakness, it's really only misplaced pride that we need to watch out for. Actually, what Darcy says is much more Darcy. Vanity is a weakness indeed, but pride, where there's a real superiority of mind, pride will always be under good regulation. His point still stands. There's value in pride. So, on the heels of Pride Month, it's almost shocking that there hasn't been a queer adaptation of Pride and Prejudice before Fire Island. That is, it's almost shocking until you remember that there's really been no mainstream queer movies about anything at all. That is all to say that Fire Island, written by Joel Kim Booster and directed by Andrew Ahn, makes a ton of sense. There's nothing more natural than a Pride and Prejudice adaptation about a group of gay men going to Fire Island. I mean, where else are you going to find a more concentrated dose of pride and a more concentrated dose of prejudice? Because the pride is loud and defiant. Because pride means something a little bit different to a marginalized community who's been told that their value is predicated upon minimizing their identities. And the prejudice, well, one need look no further than the toxic societal expectations and norms within the gay community. And Fire Island nails them both. But ignoring all of that, most importantly, Fire Island is an incredible rom-com that pays homage to the rom-com boom of the late 90s and early 2000s. And in this, it's aided greatly by the time-tested character tropes and relationship dynamics of its source material. Joel Kim Booster as Noah, our Elizabeth Bennet, is quick-witted and quick to judge. Jaded by both heteronormative views on relationships and the toxic beauty standards of the gay community, Noah's skepticism towards idealistic romance fit the Liz Bennet archetype perfectly. But it's Joel Kim Booster's portrayal of the softness and sensitivity of Noah that really brings the character fully to life. Of course, eventually and very reluctantly, one of the targets of that softness is Will, played by Conrad Ricamora, or Darcy. And man, is he a perfect Darcy. He nails that aloofness and that awkwardness, and never before has throwing a ice cream cone off screen been so endearing and said so much about a character. And whoever choreographed the dance-off deserves a ton of awards for being able to capture the full ethos of Darcy. The other main targets of Noah's softness are his friends, and chief among them is Howie, the Jane Bennet played by Bowen Yang. Although I think his character is actually doing double duty as Charlotte too, but a little bit more on that later. He's a foil for Noah. They've shared many of the same experiences and faced many of the same prejudices, but Howie remains idealistic about romance, where Noah is skeptical. Howie also provides surprising emotional depth to the story, and it's really his relationship that's afforded many of the traditional rom-com beats. That relationship is with Fire Island's Bingley, Charlie played by James Scully. A man who owns my whole heart. He is just the dumbest and goodest loaf of a man. He is impossibly nice, and Scully portrays his smitten giddiness towards Howie in such a delightfully innocent way. It gives off big golden retriever energy, and I could not be happier about it. The remaining all-queer cast is equally good. Luke and Keegan trying to reenact the Marisa Tomei in My Cousin Vinny is the funniest scene in a movie that is chock full of laugh-out-loud scenes.
Oh, my biological clock is ticking like this, and the way this case is going, I ain't never getting married.
Dex is perfect, and he is all sex and all smarm. And every movie could use more Margaret Cho. Between its cast, script, and the way it stays shockingly faithful to its source material, Fire Island is a warm, funny, charming, perfect rom-com, and really needs be nothing more. Of course, by way of its revolutionary representation, the simple fact of its existence means Fire Island is more. Because this is not simply an adaptation where the main couple is queer, but it is an adaptation where everybody is queer. And what that means is that Fire Island has the unique opportunity to give an insider's perspective on queer culture. It's this queer context that gives Fire Island the opportunity to give a different exploration of the concepts of pride and prejudice in gay culture. Because here, prejudice doesn't primarily mean homophobia. Prejudice really means prejudice within the gay community. And some of that exploration of prejudice is the same as what Austen was exploring in the original novel. Prejudice based on class and socioeconomic status. You can see that in the skewering of wealth and a certain kind of lifestyle, especially in Charlie and his friends. But a lot of that commentary is pretty perfunctory and doesn't map super coherently to the rest of the narrative. I think there probably is an interesting take here, one that could look at the perception of wealth, especially on social media, to promote a certain kind of lifestyle and how that can serve as societal currency in the gay community. But that's not the commentary that Fire Island is really interested in making. And that's fine, because Fire Island really digs into a different kind of prejudice. Namely,
no fasts, no femmes, no Asians.
That last part, no Asians, especially. And here's where the second part of the radical revolutionary representation in Fire Island comes in. Because we have 3 queer Asian men as leads in this romantic comedy. This centering of gay Asian men is, I think, a first in a mainstream property, even if it doesn't pass the Bechdel test. The history of queer Asian characters in mainstream media is paper thin. Off the top of my head, I can only think of a handful of characters who fit that mold, and almost all of them are side characters or characters with barely any speaking roles. And this isn't surprising because Hollywood has a penchant for both whitewashing and straightwashing, and so to find a queer Asian character is exceedingly rare. And Fire Island immediately establishes both the queerness and the Asianness of its leads. In the first 5 minutes, Howie and Noah are explicitly labeled as gay and as Asian.
Our bond goes a little deeper than everyone else's for complex spiritual reasons, and, well...
Jackie Chan, hey, you got a refill here, bud?
all the obvious ones, too.
And you might think this is unimportant because just looking at them, you could tell that they are both gay and Asian. But actually the explicit labeling really matters here because these are queer Asian men who sit at a specific intersection, one that has been overwhelmingly defined by invisibility and assimilation. The issue of Asian American invisibility has been well documented. Asian American events and contributions in US history are often erased. Asian American voices are often unheard in political discourse. And even in discussions of race in America, you often find that Asian Americans have been left out. While Asian Americans are the fastest growing racial group in the US, they are still incredibly underrepresented in media. Those numbers get even more grim when you're considering queer Asian characters. One study of 600 films between 2014 and 2019 found only 15 queer Asian characters with speaking roles. For context, a single Avengers movie has more than 15 straight white characters with speaking roles. While LGBTQ+ representation in media is getting better, it's still not great. And many of the struggles and issues that surround LGBTQ+ people also involve invisibility. Internal struggles with things such as coming out, passing, labels, and code switching all have to do with when queer people allow others to perceive them. And fights around don't say gay laws and the banning of queer books, and anytime you hear someone express quote unquote outrage over their quote unquote obscenity that they have seen, all these fights are about when society has deemed it appropriate for queer people to be seen. Facing homophobia and racism, queer Asian men are more likely to manage their identities by minimizing their queerness, either by attempting to perform straightness or just ignoring their sexuality altogether. And so when given the opportunity to focus on queer Asian men, it actually is really important that Fire Island is explicit in setting up both the queerness and the Asianness of its two leads. This is the first time that a mainstream property has had the opportunity to look at prejudice against Asians in the queer community. And Fire Island does not drop the ball. This script is so sharp and so specific in skewering this kind of prejudice. It is truly impressive in how economically it hits all the greatest hits of prejudice. From emasculation.
Wait, you think Charlie likes that little Asian guy?
Reese.
To unattractiveness and undesirability.
I'm not normally into like that kind of guy, but like what kind of guy? Like an Asian guy? Oh my god, I did not say that. You said that. Don't project that on me. I actually really love that he's of a different culture. Plus, I think his mom's white.
To the reduction of Asians to a singular monolithic group.
Reese, this is Howie and Noah.
Oh my god, cute. Boyfriend twins. It's like looking in a mirror.
And of course, our dear friend, fetishization.
Are you Korean?
You look Korean.
I have a sense.
If only someone had asked Noah at some point to speak Korean, we really would have collected them all. It would have been a full Ash Ketchum situation. It's so clear that this movie was written by someone who has spent a lifetime dealing with subtle and not so subtle sometimes discrimination from within their own community. I think my favorite scene that really elucidates this is the scene in which Noah is first accosted by Moses while walking up to Will. Every single word of the ensuing conversation has been choreographed to perfection.
Hey.
Howdy.
Oh god. Hi.
Couldn't help notice you were looking at me earlier.
Because obviously Moses is white, so why wouldn't Noah be looking at him and be attracted to him? This bit is particularly incredible because in the background of this scene is Conrad Ricamora looking like Conrad Ricamora.
Are you Korean?
You look Korean.
I have a sense.
Because of course, Noah is nothing but his Asianness. Really, nothing else about Noah matters to Moses. And why would it, honestly? And of course, this is only reinforced further when Will enters the scene and...
Honey, are you Filipino? You look Filipino.
Because again, why would anything else matter? And the thing that really gets me about this scene is that Moses is right. Joel Kim Booster is Korean, and Conrad Ricamora is Filipino. I think a less interesting take on this scene, or a portrayal from the outside, might have had Moses guess their ethnicities incorrectly, to show, oh, isn't he so racist because he's confusing a Korean person with a Chinese person, or a Filipino person with a Vietnamese person. But in getting it right, it shows how it's really not about that, because this is just as uncomfortable, and even maybe more uncomfortable, because really the issue here is not that he is right or wrong about whether he guesses these people's ethnicities. It's about the fact that he has reduced these two people to just their ethnicities, because nothing else matters here. It's about how being Asian in the gay community means always kind of wondering if someone is interested in you in a regular way or in a weird fetishization way. And of course, none of this was any mistake. Booster was being very intentional in this scene. He has talked about it in his stand-up.
Like, what's going on? Like, it's almost worse when people guess correctly. Like, I met this guy on a dating app and we exchanged numbers and we were texting back and forth. And out of the blue, at one point, he was like, "So you're Korean, right?" And he was like, "Yeah, that's amazing. Like, how did you guess that?" And he was like, "Your eye shape." And I was like, "Ugh, like, are you gonna measure my skull next? Like, what? Where are we going with it?"
So Fire Island is very smart about how it shows prejudice against Asians in the gay community generally. However, No Fats, No Femmes, No Asians is not just about prejudice against Asians and people generally in the gay community. What that really gets to is something more specifically targeted towards prejudice related to body image and sexual attraction and desire in the gay community. And I think it's this intersection of race and body image and sexual attraction where I wish Fire Island had given me just a little bit more. Fire Island actually does show a great job that this prejudice exists. So much of the cores of Howie and Noah's characters are defined by their reaction and their operation within that prejudice. We get very early on that Noah has decided to work out, to craft a body image for himself that he feels comfortable in. Although, as Keegan does point out,
No, boo-boo, you still 2 out of the 3.
and Howie, who doesn't have Noah's body, though is by no definition of the word fat, has struggled with feeling worthy of love and attraction. These character reactions and beats feel true. Societal stereotypes emasculate gay Asian men twice, once for being Asian and once for being gay. And this isn't just anecdotal or perceived prejudice against Asian men. Study after study after study have shown that Asian men are seen as the least desirable within the gay community. But while Fire Island recognizes that this prejudice exists, it still sometimes feels like the story is being told from within that lens. Because while Noah and Howie are affirmed as worthy of romantic desire, I don't know that the narrative ever convinces itself that Noah and Howie are hot. Despite all the sex and all the raunchiness in the movie, it's not clear whether any of the romantic interest actually expresses sexual attraction towards the leads. Howie is cute and funny. Noah is not hot enough to be that annoying. I'm not totally sure that Noah, but especially Howie, are ever affirmatively defined as sexy within the narrative. Listen, are they both hot as hell? Absolutely. I just don't know that the narrative tells me that. I mean, just compare some of the framing and the scenes with Dex or with Charlie and his ex-boyfriend Reese to those scenes with the Asian leads. As makes sense for his character, Dex is all sex. His introduction in the movie as a pair of thighs is iconic, obviously.
Oh, shit. This is humiliating. It's cool.
And every subsequent scene is just the camera telling us how hot Dex is.
So this is usually the moment where I completely debase myself in a sweaty back room full of strangers.
He really is the triple threat of hair, body, face.
Hair, body, face, or your triple threat.
While Noah and Will are definitely both in-universe hot, their scenes between each other are much more chaste and romantic than any of the scenes between Noah and Dex, which are truly all about sex and physical attraction. Similarly, when Charlie's white ex-boyfriend Reese comes into frame, we're introduced to them in their underwear, bodies touching bodies, the camera insisting upon the audience just how hot and physically attractive these two people are. There are absolutely no equivalent scenes with Howie. His first kiss scene with Charlie is played almost entirely for laughs.
Get to the good part.
What? You're just really smart. And funny. And,
We don't get any scenes telling us how hot Howie is. Instead, we get Howie sad and high on an oversized chair, surrounded by a party full of naked, gyrating men. While the entire setup of the movie is to get Howie laid, Howie doesn't have sex. Or at least, not that we know of. Howie's attractiveness is the focus of the climax of the movie, or at least what I consider to be the climax of the movie, where the tension between Howie and Noah really has come to a head.
You're really fucking bad for
Right, but fucking some Rice Queen is not gonna make you feel better. There are plenty of other guys.
For you too. No, stop it. Stop talking about this like we're the same. Stop pretending like you don't understand how the world works.
that's really unfair. Fuck you.
It's in this scene where Howie is clearly pulling double duty as Charlotte and Jane. Because Howie, like Charlotte, is the pragmatic best friend who's aware of the reality of the situation he is in and the cards he has been dealt, and is ready to settle to make the best of his situation. He is confined by the reality in which he has been given. He and Charlotte are clear-eyed about the unfair limitations placed upon them by society, while Noah and Elizabeth are idealistic and have been shown to let their prejudices cloud their view of reality. Like, Charlotte is right about her assessment of Darcy and of Collins. I think we're supposed to think that Howie is right. He's right about how the gay community values and perceives him based on his body. And the movie isn't wrong here. This is the reality. You can trust me on this one. I have sources. The sources are myself and the white guy who, like, a month ago told me that I must have some white in me somewhere. And that was meant as a compliment, I think. I don't know. The point is, I have sources. But while Charlotte's arc can end with her marrying Collins and living a fulfilling life apart from him, Howie's arc cannot end with him having sex with Moses. Because Howie is not just Charlotte, he is also Jane. Howie needs a big, fulfilling, romantic ending. So the movie sets up a narrative obstacle. How do we show Howie defying the limitations placed upon him by the toxic body image standards in the gay community, while also showing that he is right that they exist? Well, the answer to that question mostly is they don't. It is not addressed again. Noah and Howie don't really have any conversations resolving or reflecting on these prejudices or the ways in which they may be internalized. Instead, Howie kind of decides to leave. And while the two have conversations that wrap up and resolve the emotional arcs around relationships and around romance and around friendships, we never come back to this idea of the murky waters between body image and race and sexual attraction. So my only qualm is that I would have liked some resolution here. It could have been something as simple as an explicit acknowledgement between the characters that this is the reality and it sucks, but they're working to find a way to not tie their self-worth to it. Although in an ideal world, it would have been something a little bit more. It would have been something narratively affirming, something that recognizes the toxic body image standards in the gay community and rejects them. Something that tells us that Howie is hot. Something that captures the pride just as well as the story captures the prejudice. But maybe I'm looking at this wrong. Well, actually, I know I'm looking at this wrong because the story is a lot about pride. Because of course Fire Island captures pride, as only an all-queer movie determined to celebrate queer individuality could. It captures pride in the moments about cheering up your friends with choreographed dances to Britney Spears karaoke.
Sometimes I ride, sometimes I hide, sometimes I'm scared of you.
In doing something big and something stupid for someone you love.
Okay, Charlie, this is your big rom-com moment, okay? You gotta do something big, something stupid.
I love you.
Oh, no, too big, too stupid. Dial it back.
In unashamedly participating in a too long-running inside joke with family not that you were born into, but that you have chosen. And even as a character, Howie's own arc is of course about pride. It is about growing to accept and to learn that he is worthy of the love he has been seeking. Of course it is. He's a lead in a rom-com. So my personal wish that the narrative give me something a little bit more about the murky waters of race and sexual attraction is really just that, a wish. And I recognize that it is a wish born out of the fact that Fire Island is the first time I have seen queer Asian men focused on in this way. And so my natural instinct is to ask it to address every issue and every nuance of queer Asian men. Of course, this is an unfair and an impossible request, one that Joel Kim Booster was afraid of. Rep sweats and the burden of representation. And so, does Fire Island solve every issue of representing queer Asian men? No, of course not. It can't. Because that's a problem that's not supposed to be solved by a single project, but one that must be solved by an entire industry. Instead, Fire Island is a perfect, warm, charming, funny story of romance and of found family. It is a celebration of queerness. It's just a hell of a good time. And it understands what Austen thought about the difference between pride and vanity. That pride is something we must define within ourselves. This was no accident. It's precisely the reason Booster goes to Austen. And I can think of no better way to capture this than to use Booster's own words. But what all these heroines have in common, a journey that every gay man at every level of our deeply toxic, imaginary caste system can relate to, is seeing all the ridiculous rules that were created for you, that you've somehow internalized, and finally recognizing them as false. The long, arduous path that each of Austen's heroes goes through to not only hold on to the love they've found, but to believe themselves worthy of it. So I keep going back to Hartfield, to Longbourn, to Barton Cottage. I keep going back so I can remind myself, through humor that has survived hundreds of years, how impossible it is to seek value in yourself when you are using someone else's scorecard. Just as Booster goes back to Hartfield and to Longbourn and to Barton Cottage, I am sure I will be going back to Fire Island.
Why?